The automotive industry may have just made one of the most expensive mistakes in its history. For years, we've been told that saving the planet meant killing the internal combustion engine and replacing it with batteries. And so the world followed. Governments rewrote policies. Manufacturers abandoned a century of engineering. Entire economies began reshaping themselves around electric vehicles. But what if that decision was based on the wrong problem? What if the engine was never the enemy? Because right now, a new type of combustion engine is emerging, one that produces almost no carbon emissions and makes the entire EV transition start to look questionable. Not outdated, not temporary, questionable. And once you understand how it works, you might start to wonder why the industry didn't go down this path in the first place. To understand why this matters, we have to go back to the moment the automotive industry made its biggest bet. For over a century, the internal combustion engine dominated transportation. It was refined, optimized, and pushed to its physical limits. Modern engines could reach thermal efficiencies above 40%, an extraordinary achievement for a system built on controlled explosions. But there was always a problem: carbon. Every drop of gasoline burned released CO2, and as global emissions climbed, the engine that once powered the world became its biggest liability. This is where the shift began. Electric vehicles weren't just an innovation. They were positioned as a solution. No combustion, no exhaust, no emissions at the tailpipe. It sounded like the perfect answer. And in many ways, it was. Companies like Tesla didn't just build electric cars, they rewrote the narrative of what a car could be. Legacy manufacturers followed, investing hundreds of billions into battery platforms, software architectures, and global charging infrastructure. Governments accelerated the transition even further. Deadlines were announced, internal combustion bans were proposed, entire markets began preparing for a future without engines. And slowly, something interesting happened. The question was no longer, should we move away from combustion? It became, how fast can we eliminate it? But hidden inside that shift was an assumption. An assumption so fundamental that almost no one stopped to question it. That the problem with the internal combustion engine was the engine itself, not the fuel. And this is where the story begins to fracture. Because while the world was racing toward batteries, a small group of engineers started asking a different question. What if combustion didn't need to disappear, only to change what it burns? But to see why a new kind of engine could even matter, we need to look at the limits of the systems we already have. Because every solution the industry is betting on today comes with trade-offs that are harder to solve than they appear. Start with electric vehicles. At first glance, they seem almost perfect. Electric motors are incredibly efficient, often exceeding 90%. They deliver instant torque, fewer moving parts, and eliminate tailpipe emissions entirely. But the problem isn't the motor, it's the battery. Batteries store energy in chemical form, and compared to liquid fuels, they are fundamentally constrained by energy density. Even the most advanced lithium-ion cells store only a fraction of the energy per kilogram that gasoline can deliver. This means one thing: weight. To achieve long range, electric vehicles require massive battery packs, sometimes weighing hundreds of kilograms. And that weight doesn't just affect efficiency, it changes everything. Handling, braking, tire wear, structural design. And then there's charging. Unlike refueling a gasoline car, which takes minutes, charging a battery, especially at scale, places enormous stress on infrastructure. Fast chargers demand high power delivery. Entire electrical grids must adapt to support millions of vehicles charging simultaneously. And this is where the problem becomes systemic. Electric vehicles don't just require new cars, they require a new energy ecosystem. Now compare that to the internal combustion engine. For over a century, engineers pushed it to its limits. Precision fuel injection, turbocharging, variable valve timing, every possible optimization was explored. And yet, it remained inefficient. Most combustion engines convert only about 30 to 40% of fuel energy into useful work. The rest is lost as heat, dissipated through exhaust gases and cooling systems. But inefficiency wasn't its biggest problem. Emissions were. Burning hydrocarbon fuels inevitably produces carbon dioxide. No matter how advanced the engine becomes, as long as it burns gasoline or diesel, it cannot escape that fundamental chemical reality. So the industry found itself trapped between two imperfect systems. One is clean at the point of use, but heavy, resource-intensive, and dependent on a massive electrical infrastructure transformation. The other is energy-dense, fast to refuel and mechanically mature, but fundamentally tied to carbon emissions. Two systems, two sets of limitations, and no obvious way to combine their strengths without inheriting their weaknesses. This is the dilemma that has defined the modern automotive industry. Not a lack of innovation, but a collision with physics. Because at its core, the problem was never just about building better cars. It was about storing, moving, and converting energy in the most efficient way possible. And for years, it seemed like there were only two answers: batteries or combustion. Until a third option began to re-emerge. One that doesn't fit neatly into either category. One that forces a far more uncomfortable question. What if we never needed to choose between them in the first place? And this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. Because the third option isn't a new type of battery, and it isn't a fuel cell either. It's something far more familiar, an internal combustion engine, but not the kind we've known for the past 100 years. Instead of burning gasoline or diesel, this engine burns hydrogen. At first, that sounds almost too simple. Replace the fuel, keep the engine. But in reality, hydrogen changes everything about how combustion works. Because hydrogen doesn't behave like gasoline. It ignites faster, burns hotter, and diffuses more easily in air, which means the entire combustion process has to be re-engineered from the ground up. Traditional engines rely on controlled, relatively slow flame propagation. Gasoline-air mixtures ignite and burn in a predictable wave across the combustion chamber. Hydrogen doesn't wait. Its flame speed is significantly higher, which creates a risk of pre-ignition, where the mixture ignites before the spark even fires. This can cause violent pressure spikes, damaging the engine. So engineers had to rethink the system. Direct injection became critical. Instead of mixing hydrogen with air before entering the cylinder, hydrogen is injected precisely at high pressure, just moments before ignition. This allows better control over combustion timing and prevents premature ignition. Then there's the question of efficiency. Hydrogen engines can operate in what's known as ultra-lean burn conditions, using much more air relative to fuel than gasoline engines. This reduces peak temperatures and improves thermal efficiency, while also minimizing the formation of nitrogen oxides. And suddenly, something interesting happens. The same engine architecture that was once limited by carbon emissions starts to behave very differently. No carbon dioxide, no unburned hydrocarbons, just water vapor, and under controlled conditions, significantly reduced emissions overall. But the real breakthrough isn't just about emissions, it's about energy systems. Hydrogen stores energy in a way that batteries struggle to match. It can be refueled quickly, transported, and stored at scale, much like traditional fuels, but without the carbon footprint. And unlike fuel cell vehicles, which require entirely new powertrain architectures, hydrogen combustion engines can leverage decades of existing manufacturing knowledge. The pistons stay, the crankshaft stays, much of the supply chain stays. Only the fuel and the way it burns changes. This is what makes the idea so disruptive, because it doesn't ask the industry to abandon everything it knows. It asks the industry to rethink one assumption, that combustion itself was the problem. But there's a reason this technology wasn't adopted decades ago. In fact, hydrogen engines have been studied for years and repeatedly dismissed. Too unstable, too inefficient, too impractical. So what changed? Why is it coming back now? And more importantly, does this version finally solve the problems that made it fail the first time? So how does this new approach actually compare to the path the industry has already chosen? On one side, electric vehicles continue to dominate the conversation. Companies like Tesla have built an entire ecosystem around batteries, software integration, charging infrastructure, and vertically integrated manufacturing. The momentum is undeniable, and in many cases, the advantages are clear. High efficiency, smooth performance, a rapidly expanding global network. But that momentum comes with inertia, because once an industry commits hundreds of billions of dollars to a single direction, changing course becomes almost impossible. On the other side, hydrogen combustion takes a very different approach. Instead of replacing the entire system, it evolves it. Manufacturers like Toyota have already begun experimenting with hydrogen-powered race cars, testing the limits of combustion without carbon. Even performance-focused brands like Porsche are exploring alternative fuels and synthetic combustion pathways to extend the life of the engine. But hydrogen faces its own challenges. Storage is complex, infrastructure is limited, and energy efficiency, from production to combustion, can be lower than direct electrification. So this isn't a simple replacement, it's a trade-off. Electric vehicles optimize for efficiency and simplicity, while hydrogen combustion optimizes for energy density, speed, and continuity with existing systems. Which raises a far more difficult question. Is the future of mobility about choosing the most efficient technology, or the one that integrates best with the world we already have? Because if hydrogen combustion can scale, if its infrastructure can catch up, it doesn't just offer an alternative. It challenges the assumption that the industry has already chosen the right path. And once that assumption is in doubt, the future becomes a lot less certain. For more than a century, the internal combustion engine defined mobility. It powered economies, shaped cities, and became one of the most refined machines humanity has ever built. And then, almost overnight, it was declared obsolete, not because it stopped working, but because the world needed something cleaner. So the industry moved on, or at least it thought it did. Because what we're seeing now isn't the return of an old technology, it's the redefinition of it. An engine that keeps everything we once perfected, the mechanics, the responsiveness, the familiarity, but removes the one element that made it unsustainable: carbon. And that raises a question the industry is only beginning to confront. Did we abandon the combustion engine too early? Or did we simply misunderstand what it could become? Because the future of mobility may not belong to a single technology, not batteries alone, not hydrogen alone, but to the ideas that challenge what we thought we already knew. And sometimes, the most disruptive innovation isn't something entirely new. It's something we thought we had already left behind.